Okay, I think we're going to go ahead and get started here. Just a couple of housekeeping things. Everyone is muted right now. And if you're having trouble with your audio, I recommend using the dial-in number at the top of your screen and actually calling in because that can help out with the audio. Yeah, so I'm Rebecca Wintrick-Knox, and I am the Net Zero Organizer with the Mass Climate Action Network. And thank you all so much for joining us tonight. There's about 200 people calling in from across the state, which is really incredible. And we're really excited to present this webinar as the first in a four-part series with LISC and the Smart Growth Alliance on affordable housing as a climate solution. So let's go ahead and get started. As I mentioned, I'm Rebecca, and I am the Net Zero Organizer at the Mass Climate Action Network. MCAN was founded in 2000, and we are a learning network of chapters, city and town level groups across Massachusetts. And we're a network of folks taking action to solve climate change. We have about 50 chapters that represent more than 75 cities and towns in the Commonwealth. And if you're not a chapter that are part of a local group, we would love to welcome your local group to our network. And our goal is to take local action and turn that into climate action on the state level. So that ranges from everything from getting climate-friendly bylaws passed through town meeting or city council to giving you all a voice at the state level on policies and programs. And that's really why we asked you to join us tonight to learn more about implementing local solutions to take action to support affordable housing. So as everyone on this webinar knows, climate change is happening. And it's happening worldwide as well as right here in Massachusetts. And it's not something that we can really stand to wait to take action on 5 or 50 years from now. We really need to be finding clean energy solutions today. And because we know that we can't wait for the federal government to take leadership on climate, it has to be about the local climate action. And taking opportunities that we have in our communities to solve climate change at home is what it's all about. And it really has always been about that, since we know that cities and towns have always led the way on finding innovative climate solutions. And the good news is that we do have the tools to implement these climate solutions in our communities right now in Massachusetts and beyond. So tonight we'll be talking about why affordable housing matters and why it's part of the climate solution, as well as how we can take action to support affordable housing in our communities. And tonight I'd like to welcome our panelists. First, we'll be hearing from Hodja Logan, who is the Climate and Transit-Oriented Development Director at Alternatives for Community and Environment. We also are welcoming Maria Morelli, the Senior Planner with the Town of Brookline. And finally, Beverly Craig, who is the Senior Project Manager for Low Income and Moderate Income Programs at the MassCEC. And we'll be having a moderated Q&A at the end. We'll have plenty of time to answer everyone's questions, and I encourage folks to drop questions into the chat box throughout the presentation and so that I can moderate at the end. And just another quick housekeeping thing, please don't try and answer other folks' questions in the chat box as it can be distracting, but we'll have, like I said, plenty of time for our panelists to address all of your questions at the end. So let's go ahead and get started. Hodja, are you there?
Yes.
Great.
Good evening, everybody. So my name is Hodja Abdurrahim Logan. I'm the Director of Climate and Transit-Oriented Development. And what that means is I do a lot of organizing and base building, but I also build strategy around ways that we at ACE can help to mitigate the impacts of climate racism and the impacts of just, climate injustice that has happened for years in our communities. So far this year, we're working on building standards within our communities to address what the new development that's happening here. The air pollution that's caused here by the new development and the air pollution that already exists that has created things like heat islands that are very locally based because this is a very old city and Roxbury is the center of it. We are also working on building grassroots campaigns around energy and energy efficiency, and building housing justice work and public transit work, that we've always done here within the city. Tonight I'm talking about specifically about affordable housing and about low-income options around energy use, because that is a part of the housing model and the development model that's been neglected and has a really big impact on the kind of energy that we consume. So in New England, for instance, our energy mix is very heavily leaning towards gas and coals, as we all know. And so New England families actually pay more per kilowatt hour for electricity, actually 154% more than consumers in other states. And so while our median income is $67,000, we are still paying a 2.8% of our salary. As you can see, the child poverty rate and the poverty rate in general in Massachusetts is, while below the federal poverty guidelines, still pretty high. The child poverty rate, that particularly relates to EJ communities in Boston, because most children are born in Roxbury, Mattapan, and Dorchester that live in Boston. Over 70% of children born in Boston live in Roxbury, Dorchester, and Mattapan. So because that is really significant, because these families also, as you can see, contribute to or pay more per household in utility costs. So as the diagram shows on slide 10, the lowest income people, the bottom 20%, the people falling below the federal guidelines, pay 8%, or excuse me, pay over 10% of, or just below 10% of their household income in utility costs. This is actually really significant, because that's over 50% of all families that are spending that kind of money in terms of minority groups. In addition, more than half of those energy insecure households fall below the federal poverty guideline, and that is affirmed by Groundswell, which does energy research, and several other organizations that work with the federal government. I want to point out, I thought very, very important that this sort of disparity between who's paying and the amount that they're paying is more exacerbated by the fact that while households and families have, in lower income communities, have a lot less in terms of size of house per square foot, they're still paying more. So they're paying more in terms of cost, particularly. So even though a family under $40K a year, for instance, is paying 75 cents per square foot, whereas a family over 40K is spending 58 cents per square foot. So the income disparity, even though the size of houses is different, it's draftier. They have older technology, and that costs more in terms of being able to consume energy effectively. So I just wanted to point out people who earn less aren't just paying more for electricity as a percentage of their income. They're paying more because it actually costs more per square foot, and especially in Massachusetts, the homes are very old, very drafty, and often burn old fossil fuels. So efficiency upgrades and renewable energy installations cost money up front, which can put people out of reach put especially poor families out of reach for getting upgrades. They're unlikely to have the cash for capital expenses and to be able to get loans for those expenses, and that only intensifies the lack of opportunity. A family with an inefficient heating system is paying more and getting less, so it might need a space heater in the winter, which of course costs a lot more in terms of heating. I think I'd like to point out something with regard to housing and how affordable housing is being funded, and the amount of affordable housing that's actually being funded has fluctuated a lot since the last housing crash in 2008, so that the number of families receiving assistance, and there's no slide for this, but I'll share it anyway. The number of families receiving assistance in 2008 was 7,200, and the number of families receiving assistance today in 2015, that's the latest numbers I have, 7,018, even though the amount of families requiring assistance has grown a lot. So I'll wait till the end of the presentation to answer questions. But this is very important, I think, for families in low-income communities.
Great. Thank you so much, Hajar. Thank you. Maria, are you there?
Yes, I am. Thank you, Rebecca. I'm Maria Morelli. I work for the town of Brookline. I'm an urban planner, and a lot of the work that I do for the town is to shape affordable housing projects proposed by developers through a mechanism known as Chapter 40B. I also have experience managing climate action initiatives across different functional areas, including zero emissions building. And as Hajar stated so powerfully, affordable and healthy shouldn't be mutually exclusive. And it is a fact that vulnerable populations are especially susceptible to the impacts of climate change. Although there's a lot of great work that's being done combining affordable housing and sustainable building, in my interactions with developers and architects and other communities, there are still huge gaps in that knowledge base and just practical frameworks for getting started and getting done. And I think what's so great about this webinar is that we are really talking about the resources that are there, how we can connect people to make that happen, but also to identify the gaps, because those gaps are opportunities to really make this progress in this area. Next, please. One of the gaps that I like to really start with is to dispel the misconceptions about affordable housing and sustainability, which I will touch in this presentation. Two frameworks that I like to use for success is a design review process to integrate building types to support mixed income housing. Building types, if we're going to support multifamily housing, we're going to have to think about varied building types. And multifamily doesn't necessarily mean it's not going to fit into different contexts. Using a design review process, shaping a site plan, layout, the circulation, evaluating the intensity of use of the program, shaping the massing of the building so that it can relate to character-defining character-defining features in the surrounding context, all work to help multifamily be better integrated. Another framework is the design development process. And what architects mean by that is that you're going from pre-development to schematic designs all the way through construction drawings. Sustainable building isn't something that you slap on at the end, but with adjustments to the design development process from the very beginning, we're in a better position to achieve energy goals. Next, please. So for practical purposes, when I talk about sustainable building, I'm going to talk about zero emissions building, so not relying on fossil fuels, because, for many of us, many of the communities listening in, you might have a 0 by 2050 goal, zero emissions by 2050. Buildings that are getting constructed today are going to be around for a long time. If we're not talking to our constituents and the developers that we're working with now, we're not serving them well. So that's why I just say get real and talk about zero emissions building right now. That's predicated on at least three main components. One is high energy efficiency, or really low EUI. EUI is energy use intensity, basically energy consumption per square foot. Renewable energy, where is your electricity coming from? You don't want it coming from fossil fuels. And then all electric building systems, and we're seeing a lot more HVAC all electric. The other thing that doesn't really get discussed that much is the impact of embodied carbon. And what that means, embodied carbon, is the amount of greenhouse gas emissions released as a result of extraction and manufacture of building materials. You can have a high-performance building, but if you're not paying attention to how those building materials were manufactured, you can actually undo all the great achievements with your high-performance building. Now, one thing that a high energy efficiency means, we're going to need to go beyond the state building energy code or stretch code. In some communities, you might have adopted a stretch code. We found that if you want really deep energy efficiency, you're going to have to go beyond that. So which brings us to the question, what are the mandates for sustainable building in affordable housing projects? Well, on the side where projects are getting public funds, DHCD is in the process of updating their sustainability component, and I understand that will be made available very soon, the last quarter of 2019, and very likely implemented in early 2020. That will be included in qualifying allocation plans, which is a very good thing. But on the 40B side, which is mostly private development, there really isn't much incentive to go beyond what the state requires. So very frustrating for me, where I'm passionate about both affordable housing and sustainable building. We can't really put conditions on these 40B projects that might make a project economically infeasible. So it's really about not going beyond what the state requirements might be regarding the building code. Next, please. So when I talk about misconceptions that we need to dispel, I'm going to paint some broad brushstrokes here. Sometimes, if an affordable housing project is proposed or discussed, there's this reaction, a knee-jerk reaction, that just means overbuilding and all sorts of negative impacts that are going to throw off the character of a community. Another misconception is that sustainable building is a premium. It's a luxury, and it's therefore not compatible with affordable housing. And the other idea is that sustainable building, we've got to do this for new construction. Retrofits existing buildings are a big nut to crack, and we certainly have more existing buildings that are going to get redeveloped or certainly renovated, and that's that is an important thing that we have to address. Maybe each project is going to be a little bit different, but it is not impossible to make those buildings much more sustainable. Next, please. Next, please. Okay. So maybe just taking apart about affordable housing, some of the misconceptions that we need to move away from. I actually like to move away from the discussion about density, because people tend to talk about density metrics like dwelling units per acre, and that's a numerical, metric that just doesn't tell you enough about what a site can support. So some of the thoughts are, well, it's going to be out of character, and that's an obvious one. It overburdens an already developed urban area. It's not going to fit in with single-family homes. It's going to take up valuable open space. It won't be good for the environment because, again, it's overbuilding. It might lower property values, and there'll be just more traffic and congestion. And so what we're finding is that if we have a process where we're actually assessing the intensity of use, if we establish as a community, there's a range of mechanisms we can use, from design guidelines to a site plan and design review process. And then getting a little more complicated, it could be a design overlay district where you know how you're going to be shaping those building envelopes and the site circulations and the connections to the surrounding context, and form-based zoning. So those are all things that can actually be used to give a community some control over what multifamily will look like. Other practical things, low and mid-rise buildings and cluster zone parcels actually can have compact footprints, and that can conserve open space. If you think about subdivisions, there's a lot of impervious area and relatively little open space that's available for the surrounding context to experience and enjoy. Multifamily buildings overall are more sustainable because think about, say, a single-family home. You're duplicating all of those building envelopes and those HVAC systems. With a multifamily building, you're going to centralize those systems. If you have a more compact neighborhood, you have more walkable neighborhoods, and that's going to depend on mixed-use hubs. That's a very desirable thing, and that can make a community very attractive. And there are studies, and we do them on every one of my projects. Townhomes and multifamilies, they produce lower traffic volumes than, say, single family. And those are land use codes that transportation planners actually rely on and can provide as evidence when you're assessing intensity of use in a project. Next, please. So I'm not a housing planner, and I certainly want to call out a very dear colleague who is so experienced, Virginia Bullock, is a senior housing planner for the town of Brookline, and gets a lot of credit for really so much affordable housing that Brookline has. Brookline currently has over 2,000 units. I work on a sliver of these projects, namely the ones that are proposed under the Chapter 40B mechanism. And in the past 6 years that I've been working with the town has been permitting or is about to permit nearly 15 40B projects to create affordable housing for 256 families. So next, please. Next. Thanks. This is just an example of some of the work that our housing division has worked on. This is to give you an idea that different types of multifamily housing can work in varied context. It doesn't have to be the monolithic concrete, 10-story towers that we might have seen in the 70s. St. Aidans, which is right outside a local historic district. There's an example of adaptive reuse and new construction, an opportunity for home ownership and rental. And also, it was very sensitive to open space and some of the natural occurring features on that site. Next, please. Olmsted Hill, this is off Route 9 West. There is the Fisher Hill Estate, which is actually a pretty wealthy estate in the town of Brookline. This was a community that was created. There are 10 single-family market-rate homes, and there are about 24 low to moderate income condos. And this is designed with sensitivity to the surrounding context in mind. Next, please. JFK Crossing was a project that I recently worked on about a year and a half ago. This is at Harvard Street and Fuller, not too far from Coolidge Corner. Harvard Street has a very strong one-story retail, a lot of mom-and-pop shops. Obviously, it's a very walkable community and very small lots. And here's an example where we're not talking about acres. We're actually talking about 23 units on a 13,000 square foot lot. And behind, parallel to Harvard Street, is a two-family district. So we had this puzzle. We had this challenge of fitting in multifamily on a really iconic commercial street, but it's abutting a two-family district, so we know what kind of buffers do we need, what kind of articulation and the massing do we use in order to be sensitive. And this largely is a successful project. It's being constructed right now. It did involve some adaptive reuse on the abutting lot. Next, please. And this is a great project also on Harvard Street, and one that I can certainly, this was not my project, a colleague, Polly Selko, worked on this, but this is an example of how the developer, To Life, took initiative to make this as green as possible. And this was really about the just the whole spirit of the place, and the philosophy of To Life was to make this as green as possible. It wasn't something that was a mandate necessarily, but they achieved so much. There's all-electric HVAC. There's a solar hot water system. They did rely on MassCEC incentives and expertise from New Ecology, which is they provide building science expertise. One thing that I think is very helpful, that's a great conversation for maybe like another seminar, is not everything was able to be fossil fuel free, and there were some cost considerations for that. And one of the things I'm really passionate about is talking about on actual projects where fossil fuel free was able to be achieved, how that happened, so we can communicate to other developers that roadmap, but also where were the sticky points, because those are going to be the opportunities for maybe financial products or grants or incentives. I think there's going to be a lot of common ground in that respect. Next.
Hi, Maria. Do you mind just dropping us for the next couple of minutes? We're just a little short.
Oh, sure. Yep, absolutely. So I think what we'll do is maybe skip through these two slides. Actually, I just want to spend a minute on this, on the climate vulnerability assessment. Hodja spoke really powerfully about vulnerable populations. This was an assessment that showed we had a 100-acre hotspot overlapping multifamily neighborhoods with affordable housing and vulnerable populations. And something like this does provide very powerful evidence that we need, compact footprints and nature-based solutions to lower those heating and cooling loads. Next, please. Okay, so just very, very generally, I'm just advocating for a toolkit that we can share that shows design techniques we can use to create better relationships to the surrounding context. Really just a catalog of technical reviews that can help communities and even developers assess what the intensity of use could be and how much programming a site can support. Next slide. That's just a little bit more detail about what I would include in that toolkit. Next. In regard to the design development process, I spoke when I first began speaking. Sustainability goals, or really sustainability building, is really not something that you can slap on at the end. So what you'll need to do is adjust that design development process. You're going to need to establish those goals before schematic design, identify benchmark standards, incorporate iterative energy modeling, and have an integrated team, and if possible, rely on resources to help identify all possible rebates, incentives, and credits. Next, please. Okay, the other thing is that there is some misconceptions about what green building costs, and it's not a broad brushstroke that we can paint. If you are using energy modeling, you might be right-sizing systems and reducing capital costs that way. Certainly, deep energy efficiencies are going to lower net operating income, and there might be some all-electric options that have lower capital costs. Next. Okay, these are just some of the areas where we have found developers do find those sticky points: domestic hot water. They're still relying on gas, some emergency generators, again the same thing, and then the building envelopes of existing buildings might not be able to be tight enough. Next, please. Okay, and that's just a little bit more how this whole commitment to sustainable building extends beyond construction. So even after occupancy, there still needs to be user education and performance tracking. There is also an area where we will need to train maintenance pros on new systems, and there, I believe, LISC and maybe MassCEC provide some of that funding, which more property owners should know about. And next. Okay, and that's just a little bit more. Just to reiterate, there are indeed gaps. So there are different standards for, mandating green building on affordable housing, and a webinar like this is really just beginning that conversation. So hopefully we can identify opportunities to make more progress. All right, thank you.
Thanks so much, Maria. Thank you. And just a reminder to folks, please feel free to drop questions into the chat box at the top of your screen, and we can answer them at the end of the presentation. Okay, welcome to Bev.
Hi, everybody. This is Beverly Craig. I work for the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center. And if you don't know who we are, we're a quasi-governmental agency that's funded through a systems benefit charge on everybody's electric bill. So I think most of you are familiar with the MassSave program. There's a line on your electric bill that funds MassSave. There's also a really small one that says renewables. And that money, which an average homeowner spends about 29 cents a month, that goes to MassCEC, and it's our mission really to grow the state's clean energy economy. Next slide. So I'm going to first talk a little bit about official affordable housing or public housing in the state, and just new construction first, and then I'll talk about retrofits. But I'm really only talking about the stuff that's actually subsidized. So, when Hodja was talking about energy burden, that also includes naturally occurring affordable housing. So somebody who lives in a multifamily building and is low income but doesn't necessarily have a subsidy towards their housing. And it also does not, what I'm going to cover does not include single family homes that are owned by low income owners. But first, I just want to say affordable housing has always been leading green building in the United States. It's really sort of surprising. But we do know that if we're going to meet our greenhouse gas goals in the state by 2050, that all new construction must be much, much more efficient than Energy Stretch Code requires it. And so LEED has always been a great standard. I think most of you have probably heard of LEED. It's a green building standard. And I'm actually a LEED accredited professional. I think it makes you think about a lot of really important sustainability issues. But the fact is, when we look at performance of LEED buildings, even gold and platinum buildings, they very rarely beat Massachusetts State Energy Code. So on energy performance, they're not really getting us there. That's partially because, you get in a dense community, you get an awful lot of give me points for density and transportation and brownfields redevelopment. And then in Massachusetts, we have very strong stormwater requirements. So it's pretty much impossible, I think, to build in an urban setting to build anything lower than about a LEED Silver. So when people talk about, new construction, they're being very proud of being LEED Silver. That's really not necessarily going to be getting us the energy performance that we want. So we've been looking at, in the state, at more aggressive energy standards. And some of you may have heard of Passive House. That's a formerly a German standard that's been adapted here in the United States. And just to give you a perspective, a multifamily building that's built to passive house standards is going to be approximately 40% more efficient than Energy Stretch Code in Massachusetts. So MassCEC, we were having trouble getting the state agency that gives low-income housing tax credits to think about incentivizing passive house and giving more bonus points to projects that were passive house. So we decided that we would start an incentive program called the Passive House Design Challenge for affordable housing. And about a year and a half ago, we announced that it was $1.8 million. We funded 8 affordable housing projects that are getting low-income housing tax credits and to the tune of $4,000 per unit extra above what they get for tax credits to go to passive house standards. And our goal was really to show that it's really not as expensive as a lot of people think it is. So all of our recipients believe they can come in at less than a 3% cost premium. And we have 1 under construction in Cambridge. There are 5 going into construction in the spring, and then the remainder are hoping to get tax credits this fall. Next slide, please. Oh, and I didn't say, but it was on that slide, just to give you perspective how much more efficient multifamily is, and passive house in particular, when you look at compared to a single-family home in the suburbs, and we're specifically looking at a reference home in Newton when we compare these numbers, it's between 8 and 12 units annual energy use for the same square footage in a single-family home. And actually, if you think about it, most people usually live in less space in rental anyway. So it's probably much more in the range of 10 to 15 units per average single-family home. So as Maria was saying, one of the things that we really want to see happen is that the tax credit allocation process reward higher efficiency like passive house. And so she mentioned the QAP that there are going to be comments this fall, and I would encourage people to take a look at that and really comment on it and ask for more efficiency, both in new construction projects for passive house and for renovations to go deeper with deeper energy retrofits. Next slide, please. So I do want to point out on retrofits that there is a very good program for affordable housing. So if more than 50% of units are below 60% of state median income, a building owner can go into this MassSave low-income program, and it's very generous. So they do not only, it's 100% direct install program. They do a free energy assessment, free insulation, efficient lighting upgrades. They'll replace refrigerators if they're inefficient. They will pay for new heating and hot water equipment when it's old and they can replace it and it's cost effective under the MassSafe program. And in particular, electric resistance heat, which there's a surprising amount of in the state of Massachusetts. I think just in the public housing alone, there's over 12,000 units. They will replace the electric resistance heat, which is very, very inefficient and expensive, with mini split heat pumps. Next slide. So one of the other things that we've been trying to do is affordable housing, if you know ones that are officially subsidized with low-income housing tax credits, work on a refinance schedule of 15 or 30 years. So every 15 to 30 years, they go in for more tax credits to rehab kitchens and baths. And when that happens, we've always said, well, that's really the opportunity to do a deep energy retrofit too. And so in partnership with LISC, MassCEC has funded 24 to begin with, and now a program to fund 60, where we fund investment-grade energy audits. And what that does, it allows lenders like Mass Housing Partnership, and we're hoping Mass Housing soon, will start lending against the future savings involved with deeper energy retrofits. We also have been trying to help people get more out of that LEAN program, that one that I told you about. And we've been trying to get new things funded under that program. So the electric heat, where I said that mini splits happened, that was through a pilot that we funded. We're also looking at some slow expanding insulation products that work in walls that have a little bit of insulation where you want to fill the cavity but not blow out the wall. And we're also doing some pilot tests of central heat pump electric systems in electric resistance heated public housing, hoping that we can get the costs down to a point that MassCEC can start covering that as well. Next slide. So the other thing for retrofits that we're very excited about is, LISC has been working on green affordable retrofits for quite a while, but that's really been a building by building approach within a portfolio of affordable housing. And Rocky Mountain Institute now is working with us to try and promote this concept of zero over time through the whole portfolio. So as a property owner, so I used to work for Homeowners Rehab in Cambridge. They own 73 buildings, 1,400 apartments that are all affordable. Across those 73 buildings, there are going to be boilers going out at certain times, hot water going out at certain times. There's going to be re-roofing opportunities. And so by planning in advance and not doing things on an emergency basis, trying to plan for zero over time. MassCEC also has a solar advisor service to offer for affordable housing, and that means that when you re-roof, any affordable housing that does any re-roofing project can get free solar advice about sort of what paybacks would be, what vendors work in that kind of space in their area. The other thing that we have available for owners of affordable housing is MassCEC. You might know about this through other things that you do. We have an internship program to help clean energy employers. So we basically pay college students and graduate students to go work for clean energy companies in the state of Massachusetts. So we pay $15 to $16 an hour for that. So we've also reached out to affordable housing owners and said, this is an opportunity for you. You are a clean energy employer if this person is working to look across your whole portfolio to see how you can get to net zero over time, how you can take advantage of chasing down water leaks and looking at mini splits and all kinds of sustainable actions across your whole portfolio. And we're also working to try and develop some mid-finance lending products. Affordable housing is really complicated on the finance end of things. There's often 7 or 8 lenders, and so to borrow money for an energy retrofit partway through that financing cycle is practically impossible because you have to go back to every lender to get that additional debt. So we're trying to find some innovative mid-cycle finance tools. Next, please. So how can you guys get involved? So the first thing I'd say is I work on affordable housing in the state, but I'm one person, and you are many. And you probably are in communities that I might not know the affordable housing people in. Almost every community has some kind of affordable housing provider, and reaching out and getting to know those people and letting them know about me and resources at the state and the LEAN program is really important. People who are well tied into LISC or MassCEC are going to know about those resources, but I feel like there's a lot of owners of affordable housing that still don't know about these resources. So if you can get to know your local affordable housing, the asset manager, the executive director, refer them to us, that would be really great because we can reach out and put them in touch with resources. The other thing is this idea at refinance. If you can encourage them to look at doing a comprehensive energy audit, they really need to start way before the refinance happens, way back like 2 years before, so that we can figure out those deeper energy retrofits. Then the other thing that I'd like to emphasize is that this point ranking system for low-income housing tax credits, we really want to see it reward higher efficiency retrofits and new construction that's passive house. So if you're interested in that, I know MCAN will be letting you know in the fall how to comment, but we encourage you to weigh in. Next slide. So I've just put a couple resources if you're interested. I know this will be available later. The passive house new construction incentives that are out there, they're quite generous. It's $3,000 per unit. This is market rate and affordable. There's also some very generous pre-development funding. So a passive house feasibility study for $5,000 per building. Every market rate multifamily, you should encourage them to do that because it's basically free green building assistance. Same thing, there's a $20,000 passive house energy modeling subsidy. That just makes for much better buildings. Even if they don't go all the way to passive house certification, I guarantee it'll make for a 90% better building on energy. I mentioned the LEAN program, the LISC energy audit program, and then if you're ever interested in learning more about green building in general and passive house specifically, there's a lot of training resources that are showing up on the Passive House Massachusetts website, which is what I listed last. Next slide. I think that's it.
Great. Yeah, thanks so much, Bev. And thanks to all of our presenters as well as to all of you guys for joining us tonight. So I just wanted to quickly touch on some action items that folks can take after this webinar to sort of take action on what you learned about tonight. So on the state level, I'm seeing a few questions and comments in the comment box about the importance of changing our building codes as well in order to achieve more energy efficient and climate friendly affordable housing. And this is something that MCAN has been working really hard on over the past year or so. Many of you might be familiar with our campaign to change our current stretch energy code to a net zero standard. So on the state level, we're encouraging folks to take action by calling your representative and letting them know that you're really passionate about allowing communities to require net zero buildings at the community level. And then on the local action side, we want to encourage folks to stay posted for the next 3 segments of this webinar that LISC and Smart Growth Alliance and MCAN are co-hosting in order to get more insight into what we can do on the local level as far as zoning solutions to promote more climate-friendly affordable housing. And so I just want to thank our panelists once more, as well as our partners, LISC and the Mass Smart Growth Alliance, for joining us tonight. And I encourage folks to check out both of their websites to find out more ways that you guys can get involved. And we have a few minutes for questions now. So the first question we have is, can municipal utility towns participate in MassSAVE LEAN program and MassCEC Passive House Design program? Bev, do you want to take that one?
Sure. The MassSAVE LEAN program, so retrofitting existing affordable housing or public housing, it's not exactly MassSAVE money, but almost every MLP has something very similar. So if you would like to reach out to me with your specific MLP, we can track down what resources there are in that MLP. I believe the MassSAVE passive house incentives for new construction are not available in MLPs. But that's something I should check on. I don't totally know that's true.
Thanks, Bev. So another question maybe for Hodja is, how can local advocacy groups, so local climate action groups, get involved to support affordable housing?
Could you repeat that again, Rebecca?
Sure. So I said, how can local climate action groups get involved to support affordable housing? Hodja, are you there?
Yeah, I had to unmute. Good evening.
Oh, yeah, thanks.
So we're supporting affordable housing at ACE by advocating for it. I think it's a kind of a different balance in this part of town because there is a rapid change in the amount of the percentage of increase in terms of how quickly the market rate is rising here. And so the conversation we often have with homeowners is, can your children still be a part of your community? And when people start to talk about or start to think about, aging in place with the home that they've bought, etc., can they send their kids to college and the children come back and they see their grandkids regularly? or their children come back and begin to build their nest in the community that they love. And oftentimes they cannot. So that's one question and one way to support affordable housing. Also, affordable housing looks very different in different communities. In Boston, we've had a sort of long time footprint where affordable housing looked like really big, ugly buildings. But even here, they're knocking down the big, ugly buildings and creating townhouses that look different and feel different and create different kinds of neighborhood communities. There's also a lot of affordable housing that looks like just a subsidy for working families, and with those kinds of affordable housing units, the people are transitioned as a climate activist, finding the right subsidies for community solar, for instance, would allow for, and for the other programs that were mentioned tonight, would allow for better energy efficiency. And still, you wouldn't know that the housing was affordable. And so those are my ideas. I hope that helps.
Yeah, thanks so much.
I have some thoughts too, if you wouldn't. So, I think everyone knows housing has gotten extremely expensive. So I would love to see more resources put to subsidize affordable housing, but there's a bigger need. So many people have moved to the metro area, and there has not been an increase, especially in multifamily. The last 15 years, if you look, there just has not been that much multifamily. Part of that's because local communities need a supermajority, usually for special permit for multifamily. And it's very easy for residents who don't like, the thought of a multifamily near them to kill projects. We are seeing more special permits being approved for density, but I think, encouraging through special permit new construction to go to the highest level of energy efficiency, so passive house. With these new MassSave passive house incentives, there's really very little excuse for a new construction project not to go to passive house. But we do need that development to happen. I think that number of, it's very easy to say that at least 10 passive house units are equivalent to one single family existing home. And that just shows you how important that is to the calculus of climate.
Thanks, Bev.
I think I'll just chime in here. In addition, thank you, Bev. There is new housing in general in Massachusetts is not reflecting housing for families, and so in your advocacy, having affordable housing for families. And those could be multi-unit housing. The design only needs to have a layout that has enough common space and enough bedroom sizes to be a unit for families. It doesn't have to be, it doesn't have to look like a single-family home. But it should have at least 3 bedrooms, and it should have common spaces and that kind of thing. And a lot of new construction in Massachusetts is 0 to 2 bedroom, which I think often, especially when they're in multifamily buildings, and that's just exacerbating the problem.
Yeah, these are really good points. So we are just about out of time, but I want to thank all of our panelists once again, as well as everyone for joining. And if folks are interested in learning more, I will have the contact information for the folks who spoke tonight, as well as my contact information and the information for our co-sponsors. And if you're interested, I'm seeing a lot of questions specific to building codes. If you're interested in learning more about building codes, I definitely encourage you to reach out to me directly at Rebecca@massclimateaction.net. to get more involved in our Building Codes campaign. But thank you again to Bev, Hajar, and Maria. You guys are all great. And expect an email from me tomorrow with a copy of the recording and some other resources to help you guys take action. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Rebecca.
Thanks, Rebecca.
Bye.
Bye.